Hello, 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 and welcome to your Youth Day edition of God's Economy. For everybody who's out there, thank you very much. I know that it's Youth Weekend. There has been celebrations galore, indabas, discussions, charting the way forward. And a good morning to you, Stephanie. How are you doing on this glorious Youth Day?
Morning to you, Munyumba. How are you?
Fine, thanks. And how's your Youth Day going?
My youth day is going well. Very, very good, I should say.
What are the plans of the youth today? That's what we're trying to ask. What are the plans of the youth? Because this is your celebration day. Well, it's still mine. I'm still youth in transit, but it is celebration day for you.
Um, I think my plans are just to, follow up. I love writing so much. So for me, I think Youth Day is all about reflecting to what I wouldn't do better last year and obviously trying to do better. Thank God I'm still a youth and I still have some years. So let me just work hard.
To people out there, the average Zambian in the next 20 years or so,
Mm.
25 years, is going to be living up to 75. So it's not youth and then you die. That's the myth that's happening out there. But yes, there's a long time from youth, but it is a transfer of life. It's wonderful
Mm.
possibilities. And today, Stephanie, breaking off from the conversations we've been having about the four money skills, we were talking about our acts the last time. The last time we talked about investing in the next generation in children in Broadcasting Week. Today, I want to talk very similarly about passing the torch. Okay. And today's going to be a serious conversation about passing the torch from one generation to another. So, this is God's Economy, where we're going to talk
Mm.
about intergenerational succession and why that's important at family level, why that's important at business level, why that's important at many levels. It is very important for people to practice the art of intergenerational succession and how to transfer from one generation to the other. So today, I'm going to pass on four main things, and I'm going to be talking about the power of intergenerational transfer. I'm going to give you examples of good intergenerational transfer and a bad one, all from the Bible and also from history. We're going to talk about five building blocks of intergenerational transfer based on First Chronicles 28 9 to 21. And then we're also going to talk about biblical succession. And these are components that we learn from the succession between Moses and Joshua. So that's what we want to talk about. And today I want to talk about what I really want as many people to take from this today is to the older generation, what is intergenerational? What do we have to do to facilitate a good intergenerational transfer? And to the younger generation, what do we have to be to facilitate? And I use the word we in both context because, like I said, I'm trapped in the middle. In Zambia, 35 is the cutoff point or the defining point. Actually, youth is it's 15 to 34. That is what is defined as youth in Zambia. In terms of demographics and statistics, it's 15 to 34. Some countries push it to 40, but it's 15 to 34. To be honest, I actually always thought it was 30. I don't know when, when we got to this thing of being youth is between us just above 30. By 30, no one can accept any excuses of your youth. Um, but from that, and also being what's it, 35 to about 64, that is middle aged. That is the middle age of life. Then you are a senior citizen from about 64 upwards. That is kind of what you're considered. And I wanted to talk about, firstly, Stephanie, that there are phases to life that we all have to think about. That the phases to life are the first, let's say people finish school around 20 these days. 15 really is, you should be in school still when you're 15, 16, 17, 9, 18. That's when you really should now start thinking about getting out of school. But we kind of count it because of the basic school system. But ideally, because we've made education free all the way, somebody should still be in school all the way up to 18. Around 19, in fact, up to voting age, you should still be in school. Once you now attain voting age, that's maybe when you can start adult life. And I would say to people, the first 15 years of your adult life, and I'm really looking at from 20 upwards. That should be made making your mind up, setting your direction, setting your foundations. What are you good at? Discovering what you're good at, trying to work on which mission you're going to embark on. Up to about 35, that's when we can accept that you're still finding yourself. You're finding, what is my axe? And I've sharpened it. You're sharpening that axe. You're trying to become world class at something. At this point, you're still experimenting. Then from about 35 onwards, this is when you should have developed your acts. What are you good at? And you are now doing it. You're contributing to the world. You're making a contribution. You're no longer asking for help, but you're now giving it out. You're actually pushing a contribution to this world. And then what you are now doing when you get above that, when you hit from 50 upwards, you are giving back. The 50-year-olds are the ones now who mentor the people. They're the ones who teach. They're the ones who guide. And then the 60-year-olds are kind of the ones who become those oracles of knowledge in life. From 65 upwards, you become this oracle of knowledge where now you speak to all generations and you lead all generations. But there are these three phases. So I always say from 20 to 35, you're making up your mind. From 30 from what's it from 35 to 50, you're making your mark, and from 50 to 65, you're kind of making your impact. And this is where you're kind of giving back, and that is what you are. That is kind of the journeys we're doing now. How do we operate with the generations? Because one of the problems I think we've had, especially as Africa, but I've seen this around many, is that we don't understand that in order to develop, we must be on a constant journey and a constant pursuit. And that often requires seeing things bigger than us. So today, as I said, I want to talk about intergenerational transfer, how to keep a mission alive through multiple generations, whether it's a business mission, whether it's a national development mission, whether it's a cause of an NGO that you've started. How do you keep these things alive? Because the biggest problem we have, especially even in the business world or in the wealth world, is the moment you die, it dies with you. Yeah, and that's why Vusi Tembokwaya once talked about being a legacy entrepreneur or being a lifestyle entrepreneur. And what he said is that there are people who start businesses. They get to take their children to private school. They get to, live in a lovely house. They get to do all these nice things. And then when they die, whoop, gone. Like that business goes. Like everything just packs up and it folds. But then there are those people who start businesses, and even after their retirement, their resignation, and their death, they're able to transition this business to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. How come people have that kind of power? And that's what we want to try and talk about today, about the importance of intergenerational transfer. So getting back to the presentation, uh, the first thing I want to show you, Stephanie, is an old graph that I teach people with. This is called the intergenerational investment map. And I asked the question, let's say a family saves and invests
Mm-hmm.
250 kwacha, and I always use the bond market as an example because of consistent growth, at an interest rate of 9%. And we count a generation as 25 years. Okay. I want to show you how this works through 4 generations. Generation one has been saving and investing, and by the end of it, we've done the math, accumulates, and it's a consistent rate of return of 9%. um, Generation one gets to about 264,000 kwacha. They hand over the 264,000 kwacha to the next generation, and they continue saving and investing 250 kwacha on top of the 264,000, and they also keep that invested. By the end of the second generation, that becomes 2.4 million. It gets handed over to generation three, who does the same thing. They're investing, they're keeping this thing alive, this 2.5. They're keeping it invested, but they're also adding their 2.5, and it's also growing by 9%. What happens? By generation three, this becomes 22 million. By the fourth generation, okay, now you can see that they've taken this 22 and they've grown it. So a single habit of investing money and keeping it invested throughout 4 generations has gone from nothing to 191 million kwacha worth of wealth. And basically, what I'm trying to say is we develop when we realize wealth creation is not a 100-meter sprint, but rather an intergenerational long distance relay. Okay, that is what we need to recognize. It is an intergenerational relay. Each generation has got a part to play of moving it to a certain point and handing it to the next one and training that next generation to continue the work as it was. And what you will find is that families or institutions or nations, I'm going to give you examples who have done this, have done very well. The best example, by the way, Stephanie, is the Congo Gumi construction business, which is a construction business in Japan that has been around for 1,444 years, and 43 members of the family have run that
Mm-hmm.
company. And they've been handing it over 43 generations. They have lasted longer than countries. Okay. In fact, the Congo Gumi company is older than Japan itself, and it is still running. To this day, it is still building monasteries and it's still building temples. So that is an example of what we call intergenerational transfer and the power of it. So let me give you some real examples. This is a hypothetical. Here's a story, obviously, in the Bible, and many people don't understand. Here's God talking to Moses, and sorry, talking to Abraham. In Genesis 22:17, he says, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous
Mm-hmm.
as the stars. Did Abraham live to see that promise? No. 600 years later, Moses addresses the Joshua generation in the desert, and he says this sentence: you are too heavy a burden for me to carry alone. The Lord your God has increased your numbers. Today you are as numerous as the stars. So if you look very carefully, this was in Deuteronomy 1 9 to 10, the true progress that occurred of the numbers being as numerous as the stars did not happen with Abraham. It happened with Moses 600 years later. And that is why we have to say it's intergenerational process. Some will say this is the Bible. Well, let me take you to a different story. I always give the example of the Trump family, and I'm going to summarize this one very quickly. From Frederick Trump, who was a who was an immigrant who came with nothing. He was a poor grape farming immigrant who came in from Germany with nothing in his hands and basically hustled his way until he built and he off the gold rush. He eventually started to build a bit of hospitality buildings. He built bars, he built a few resorts, he built hotels, but he had a vision to start building luxury resorts. I want you to keep that in your mind, Stephanie. Frederick Trump, who came into America in 1891, lived all the way up to 1918, had a vision to build luxury resorts, but never got to see it. But what he did is, when he died, he left stocks, bonds, savings to the tune of today's value of $500,000, which his wife, Elizabeth, who he had met earlier, now took over. Elizabeth was a 33-year-old widow who took those things, who took the cash savings and the 4 vacant plots and started to develop houses on them and sell them to people and brokered mortgages and created a company called E. Trump and Son, Elizabeth Trump and Son, where their firstborn child, Fred Trump Jr., is the one who took over the business. Fred Trump takes over the business with the hopes of diversifying. He wants to hold on to his father's vision of creating resorts and everything, but he just decides to buy a mortgage brokerage company, finds plots of land which are about to go into default, and from 1935 to 1964, he builds a lot of houses, single-bedroom houses in Brooklyn, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, thousands of them. So at least he expanded the empire. He hands over to his son Donald in 1971, who had been working in the business since 1967. Donald takes over the business, and over the 4 years, he renames the business the Trump Organization so that it can start to diversify. And he sets on to the mission of diversifying. Okay, so Fred started, Elizabeth built. What's it? Frederick the First triggered it off. Elizabeth built the business. Fred Jr. expanded the business. Donald diversified the business. But it was the same vision. Because today, the Trump Organization has 500 entities, including real estate, residential, real estate, hotels, resorts, golf courses, all sorts of things, and generates $400 million worth of revenue, starting from a pile of stocks, bonds, and empty property, developed into a small mortgage brokerage in one neighborhood, developed into a multi-state mortgage brokerage, diversified into it. Each generation added to the vision. That's what I want you to look at. Okay? That is the purpose of what we mean by intergenerational transfer. This is a story here, if you want to look, of Chinese GDP under different leaders, under the same view. Mao Zedong. And now in 1949, when Chairman Mao walked into power, they said after 100 years, China will be the number one economy. China wasn't even in the top 50 when he said that. China was a poor country. In fact, it was even more poor than Zambia. 99% of Chinese were living in abject poverty. Only 1% of them were not. And when they saw this growth, what you can see is they set out on a 100-year mission. And this is up to about, this is up to kind of up to where we are today. You can see its growth in yen. That this development has happened because every Chinese administration has picked up where the last one left off. And they've continued the work of expanding China. And you can see people take a look at what happened in Zheng Zemin and Hu Jintao and says that's where it happened. But the foundations were happening in Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping, who actually set the foundations, and everyone, China believes in building on what the last one did. That's the way China runs their country. They don't destroy the last one, they build
Mm-hmm.
on what the last one did. And that is why they've got very successful intergenerational transfer of leadership. Now, here's a sad example of where it's failing. 4 out of the last 5 American presidents were born within 4 years of each other. Okay. And what's happening, unfortunately, in America, and Barack Obama is only the anomaly because Hillary Clinton was actually supposed to win that election. It's just Barack Obama came from nowhere and took her out. And Hillary Clinton was supposed to, that was supposed to be 19, that was basically, Hillary Clinton was born just a year after Bill Clinton, 1947. So if Hillary Clinton had won, all the leaders of America over the last 30 years, 32 years, would have been born within the same generation. 1946, 1946, Trump, Clinton, and Bush Jr. were all born in 1946. Obama, like I said, is the only problem. And what they've said, well, this was said by Jeremy Boring, who said it is a dangerous sign of imminent collapse when any generation, or sorry, when any society or nation is failing to hand over intergenerational power. Okay, so you can see that America is struggling at the moment, mainly because they are struggling to actually hand over power from one generation to another, to the fact that they're stuck with leaders who are born in the 1940s, in the exact same ring of each other. Okay, so every generation has to go through growth. So, what should we be doing when it comes to intergenerational transfer? So, these are just some examples that kind of wake people up of what this actually means. So, the first things I wanted to just touch on, Stephanie, has got to do with the part of the Bible, the two parts of the Bible where we saw good succession. And good succession comes from two places of the Bible, one being the intersection between Deuteronomy. In fact, the whole of Deuteronomy was a succession
Mm.
plan. It was Moses actually summarizing their time in the desert and being able to speak to them and say, look, we've made it to the River Jordan. Now it's time for you guys to cross and to expand the territory. It's time for you to now become the next generation. It's time for you to fulfill the mandate. And he now proceeds to teach them the way to live there. And finally, he then even asks God at the end of the book of Numbers, Moses asks God, who will lead these people? If I am not to go in there, who will lead the people into the promised land? And that's when God points to Joshua and says, that is the one you take. Okay. And at the end of it, Moses even ordains Joshua. Moses even now hands Joshua over and says, you are the one now who will take over from me. And the second point of intergenerational succession, which was quite good, was David and Solomon. David could not build the temple, but he handed over instructions to Solomon. This is First Chronicles 28, 9 to 21. I call this the actual biblical structure of a transfer, where he then gives Solomon instructions. He talks to him about being with God, staying in the culture of the people, upholding the value of the law. Even Moses talks to him, hold the law, stay with the people. Then the next thing he tells him is, this is your character. Be strong and be courageous. I want you to remember those words, because the same things were said to Joshua as well. Be strong and courageous. Moses said it to the people. He said, be strong and courageous. He said it to Joshua, be strong and courageous. God says it to Joshua, be strong and courageous. Even David says it to Solomon, be strong and courageous and do the work. So this statement is a statement of character, strength, and courage. That is what is asked of each generation, to take up a position of strength and courage. Then he goes on to give him a plan, a cause. This one, Moses tells him, go into the promised land. That's what he then hands him over. While David told Solomon, build the temple. That's what he had instructed him to do. And then they go on to give them prescriptions on how to use resources. They also give them prescriptions on how to stay connected with society. So there are 5 components of a very strong intergenerational transfer that need to occur. 5 things need to be transferred from one generation to the next for successful continuity. Okay. And I'm going to go through these 5 things now. And I'm going to break them down according to both of their stories. Now, the 5 components of a good transfer is one, cultures. Transfer of culture, transferring our beliefs and our behaviors. You must make sure, the Bible does say, raise your children up in the way of the Lord, and they will not depart from it. So to the youth of Zambia now, this is the question that you must start looking at. Okay, as I said, as I'm somebody who's now transitioning out, and it's not a bragging right. It's just, this is a phase of life. I have to
Mm,
look at life a little bit differently. You can tolerate a 25-year-old saying, "I'm still finding myself." You can't tolerate a 35-year-old saying that. Okay,
mm,
it becomes intolerable when you're 35 and still finding yourself. Okay, you better found yourself, and you better be doing something very useful to society. That's how the world works. But the point I'm trying to say is, at this point, I'm kind of looking at what I've known my whole life of being the young one, and then looking at what's ahead. And I've come to understand that some of the things that have helped me now start to develop myself, and really now start to develop the journey I'm on, because I've gone through the phase of developing myself. Now I'm developing my journey. And then eventually I'll develop my story. That's the final part, where there will be an inspirational story that I can now tell, whether it's to my children, my grandchildren, or to the society at large. But at this point, I am developing my journey, my impact. And the first thing I've recognized is that the foundation of it all is culture, which is beliefs and behavior. What beliefs and behavior? Not culture in terms of my tribe name, or where I come from ethnically. That's a beautiful part of it. But the important part that really strikes it is, what am I practicing and what do I believe in? Because what I believe
mm,
in determines how I'll make decisions. Okay. Whatever somebody believes determines how they make decisions. A Christian will make different decisions with money than possibly a Muslim or a non-believer. There's different things, the exact same thing, but because they're using a different belief system, their decision making is altered. Okay. So decision making differentiates according to belief systems. Now, sometimes there are overlaps, but the point is, the first thing that culture offers us is a belief system that creates a framework for our decision making. It'll affect the way you think about work. It'll affect the way you think about money. It'll affect the way you think about your body and your health. It'll affect the way you think about family. It'll affect the way you think about mental and emotional development. It will affect those things. So when you have to make decisions and take actions, now behaviors are things that you will practice instinctively. These are your habits. So, and your habits form about 40% of your outcomes in your day. So, passing on behaviors, the question we have to ask ourselves for the next generation, or for the next generation looking forward, is, what behaviors from the past or the past generations do we want to absorb? Okay. What beliefs do we still need to carry? And to the past generation, talking to the younger ones, what do we need them to continue? What behaviors do we need? Not the things you want for corruption. I mean, for the betterment of the country. And I'm going to start here, Stephanie. I'm going to just pause here for a second. One of these examples I gave of intergenerational transfer that was successful, I'll tell you one thing they did have. They had timeless missions. China's pursuit to be the number one economy was a 100-year mission. Mao Zedong was never going to live to see that. He was never going to live to see that, but he still declared it. So a 100-year mission is a wonderful frame for somebody to say this is a timeless mission. They were interviewing, I think the CEO, the head of Trade Kings, and he
mm,
on CNN, they had this interview on him, and he said The group CEO had said to him, you know, the pursuit of being number one is not a destination, but rather a journey. That is how that business has maintained an intergenerational transfer, because they see it as a journey. They don't see it as a single destination to get to. Too many of us, when we look at our lives going forward, we only see what we want to get ourselves. So we never really see anything beyond ourselves. And the betterment of a nation, a people, a family starts with a vision that I will outlive you. Can you start something that you will die in the middle of, raise people to continue and keep going? That is how people develop. That is how businesses last 200 years. That's how nations keep growing for multiple centuries, because there's intergenerational vision that is woven into the foundations of those institutions. So the first thing, and then once you've established that vision, an intergenerational vision, then you can start talking. Because I shudder to think, Stephanie, why we don't have a Zambia 2064 plan, where we're thinking about what is Zambia going to be in the year 2064, when Zambia is 100 years and I'm handing it over to my grandchildren. What am I
Mm.
thinking about that? Because that's Zambia 2064 is 41 years from now. I'll be 76, 76, 77. By then, I should have grandchildren who are older and are now starting to get older. And they're the ones who are going to start. We're going to start growing the next. We're going to start contributing that. That'll be their nation to take up, to grow families in. What does that look like? Okay, very few people even think about Zambia next week, let alone Zambia 2064. When 100 years have passed, at the centenary of our nation, what will that stand for? And that is the battle that we all struggle with. Countries have lasted so many years because they think like this. Okay, these developed
Mm.
countries think like this. We don't. So the first step to having this intergenerational development is having a journey mindset and not a destination mindset, and having an intergenerational vision as opposed to an instantaneous outcome. That is the first thing that we need to shift from. We need to shift from, we just want to get to having cars and those things. It's not a bad thing to have those things. We need to shift from that being the destination of life and move towards saying there's a journey that we need to go on to continuously pursue and thrive to. What does this look like? And how far are we looking ahead? Because everyone, unfortunately, is built on this greedy mindset of only wanting to see where they can enjoy and not where the next generations can build on. And I'll talk to that just now. But in
Yeah.
order to do this, yeah, sorry, yeah.
So now that you're talking about this culture of thinking ahead, and obviously the culture for today thinks for today and tomorrow, not really for the future. How do you embrace this culture that you're talking about now? Is it too late? Can something be done about it?
No, it's never too late, Stephanie. What people need, what change happens when people have examples. So each of us as individuals need to start doing it. Okay?
Mm.
If you can start practicing it for your family, if you can look at a piece of land that you have and ask yourself in 100 years, what do I want this to be? And then slowly contribute to it. Then add one generation. Remember, I just gave you an example of a Zambian company which started with a guy driving a car, putting groceries in the back. And then what happens is children now turn it into manufacturing. The other one diversifies it. All of a sudden, things start changing with each generation because people see things bigger than what they are today. Vision is a very strong power that people need to have. And they need to stop looking at vision only for themselves, but they need to start looking at vision for what they see in their community, their family. So the first place to start seeing this change, Stephanie, is at family level. If people can start seeing things intergenerationally, grooming the next generation, building intergenerational visions, I promise you that the nation will start to mold, because a nation is nothing but the aggregation of its families. The leadership we have in our nation is a reflection of who we are as people. There's an old Arabic saying that says, you deserve the leaders you get, okay? Because they are usually a reflection of you as a person. People say, no, but sometimes we get bad leaders. Yes, because it speaks to you as a group of people. So that is why I was just saying that it can be changed if we opt to start becoming the change ourselves. I have viewed intergenerational vision. I'm not going to complete the goal of me saying I want to see 1 million millionaires in Zambia by 2050 and then have us becoming a leading power in Africa. I'm probably
Mm,
not going to live to see that, or I may live to see it, but I'll be incapacitated at one point. Okay. By the time this starts to come to fruition, but I'm seeing it and it's driving me and it's something I believe in. And it's something we should all start to believe in. We should build things that we can't see and that we're probably not going to live to see or live to enjoy, or we'll be too old to enjoy it. But people will say things like, but I'll be too old. Why should I even bother? And that's why we don't even embark on some of these missions. So the first thing I would say is intergenerational thinking and viewing. That's the first step. The second step, then now the first of these of the things we should be doing is handing over a culture. Because once we've adopted this, we'll say, well, there's a culture. What I'm seeing now requires a specific culture, a belief system, and a behavioral pattern which requires this. Then I need to start handing that over. How do you hand it over? Well, here's the beauty, Stephanie. According
mm,
to the Bible, children children grow up and do what they saw when they were kids. That is actually what they do. This is actually why even breaking the habits of finance, poor financial management, is difficult, because people are basing their decisions off what they saw when they were kids. Okay, so what you need to start doing is, if you start exhibiting the change in your life now, the next generation sees it and instinctively emulates it. Okay. Especially if they start to see progress around it, they gravitate towards it and they instinctively emulate it. So it starts by just making the decision to start doing it. And then once you start doing it, it starts becoming a wave. It's not going to change this week. This is the problem of Zambia. Whenever we want to change something, we want to change it like today. Like, that's the problem. We want to say, how do we get the whole country? No, there's something we call the change diffusion curve, where a few enthusiasts take up something, then early adopters come in, then a large majority, early majority, late majority, laggards. Things diffuse through society. So it starts with a focal point, just like a virus in society. The whole one day, the whole society is not just infected, but everyone one day it does eventually get to everyone. So starting to look at another thing that we should actually hand over to the next generation is character. And they use the terminology strength and courage. I'm going to skip to the next slide very quickly because there's something I wanted to share here. Now, this is a equation I tout a lot. I know that we don't have people here, but for those who are watching, this is an equation that I tout a lot, and I look at it from such Weir's masterclass, and it's something that I keep saying because this is actually very important for our nation, and I'll keep saying it constantly because everybody needs to try and look at a way to adopt this. And he talks about, how do you create high performance? So I'm looking at the character, and I'm going to link this very closely to the words strength and courage. But if we're going to go back to culture, look at what he points out when he says high performance culture. And the first thing he points out here is being results oriented. We no longer have to start saying, oh, we want to see ribbon cuttings, we want to see this. We should become a group of people who are results oriented, and not just from our politicians, but from ourselves. We need to demand results from ourselves, okay, more than anything, and start making sure we're driven to deliver results, not even demanding results, deliver results. That is what it means to be results oriented. To be uncomfortable with keeping things comfortable and always looking at trying to make sure that we try and change and evolve. We need to consider always looking at being competent more than qualified. There was a Chinese businessman I remember who was talking to Zambians. He said, "You people like papers too much. You don't do much,
mm,
but you like papers too much. You go to school, you study, you study, you study, and then you just study, study, study some more, studies, and you're hoping to get paid, but you don't improve your productivity, you don't improve your markets, you don't build things." So we need to not just be a society that's looking to just rack up papers all the time, but also to actually build things, do things, become better at things, to actually do things better. And also to seek responsibility before reward. That reward follows people who seek responsibility first. And that requires an environment where we openly speak to one another, where we can openly dialogue with one another, and where we seek constant evolution, where we're constantly always trying to change, where we're constantly trying to improve ourselves, not for the sake of change, but for the sake of betterment, because it's a journey of improvement constantly. The Bible says the journey of the righteous is brighter and brighter by the day. It's like the morning sun, and it gets brighter and brighter. That is the journey that we should be on. Now, that is the culture we need to adopt. So the younger generation must adopt this culture, and the older generation must inculcate this culture into the younger generation. This is passing of the torch. The next thing we must look at is character. And the character, it says he has high performance people. And I really want to harp on this point of strong and courageous, because that word is used so much in the Bible. Okay, Joshua is told to be strong and be courageous. Solomon is told, be strong and courageous. God tells Joshua, be strong and courageous.
Mm.
Moses tells Joshua, be strong and courageous. David tells that twice to Solomon. So when something is repeated in the Bible multiple times, perhaps take it very seriously. What I've noticed here is that it's actually covered right here. If you look at the part which says attitude, which saying take initiative, take responsibility, start by yourself, that, Stephanie, is courage. Courage is a
Mm.
person who takes the initiative whenever something needs to be done. Courage is a person who, no matter what happens to them, no matter whose fault something is, they assume responsibility and they make it happen. Okay, that is how powerful people are who take courage. And self-starter are people you don't have to tell them to do something. When they see it needs to be done, they just decide it's time to get it done, and I'm raising my hand to go and make it, to go and do it. That is courage. And it's overlaid by what he calls temperament. And this is what I call strength. So, strength, most people think about it as physical power we get to exert on people. The Bible actually says, better is a man who can rule himself than who can rule a whole city. And I think the strength he's talking about here is tenacity and resilience. That no matter what befalls you, what hits you, because the number one power, Stephanie, of being able to get to any destination is just outlasting your competition. The person who you can take a knock and you're back up, you can get stretched and you're back together and you keep going. That one. Have you ever watched The Terminator? The movie The
Yeah,
Terminator.
yeah, I have.
You've seen that thing. When they shoot it, it just forms back and continues running. That's what it
Mm-hmm.
means to be tenacious and resilient. That no matter what hits you, stretches you, pulls you, you keep going. Because eventually the devil and the world get tired of knocking you out. Eventually the winds can only blow so much. So when it says be strong and courageous, take it this way. Have an attitude of taking the initiative, taking responsibility. Not the government must, I must. That's taking the initiative. So the old generation speak of the government must, the government should, has to die, and we must hand over to the new generation that the people must. Even the radical entrepreneur looked at the president in the youth in Daba and said, "It is not the job of the government to create jobs. It is us, the entrepreneurial community. Your job is to create a police force that maintains peace, is to create health that so that we can take our people who need to go to the hospital, to create networks that we can move on. That is what you need to do. But it is us who are going to create the jobs. And that is taking the initiative. That is the mentality that has to change. Being a self-starter, not waiting for the conditions to get well for you to just start that business or start that idea. That is the character that we have to start exhibiting as Zambians. Being tenacious enough to say that even when there's high inflation, we persist. Even when the economy slows down, we persist. You know, that persisting mindset to say we can
Mm.
get through anything. Okay, that mindset, how China went through 99% poverty and persisted through it. And now, by the way, they're less than 24% poverty. They've managed to almost eradicate this thing from their society because they have persisted and they've kept on going on the singular vision to make this work. Now, this creates a society that is relentless, restless, innovative, and dynamic. That is what we mean by be strong and courageous. The Bible said that so many times. Now, obviously, to manage this, the leadership, as he points out, has to be high performance. You need to make sure that there's empowerment and minimal barriers. You need to teach people to not just go for the target, not just when we say Zambia wants to have 4% GDP, the individuals must say, well, good for them. We want to grow by 20%, okay, a year. You know, that we must stretch that target. That when the government says I want to grow at 4%, you shouldn't say, oh, well, then my income must grow by 4%. No, you must push yourself as well to also grow faster than that, because your growth is the nation. Clearly setting out what goals we're moving in. China gave the people their goals. Moses gave the people clear KPIs. David gave Solomon clear KPIs that he had to achieve. And therefore, we have to manage their expectations and keep a good communication between the two. That's how we manage this process. But the culture of being high performance, the character of being high performance, that is actually stipulated in this actual thing. And that's why I like this equation. And I want as many people, I always tell people, download it, look at it, and ask yourself, not what must the government do? What must I do to become like this? Okay, because once you become like this, you inspire others to become like this, you raise your children to become like this, you run your companies to become like this, you work with your suppliers to become like this, and it spreads through society. Not electing somebody to become like this in prayers that it will rub down onto you. No, you have to make the decisions as well to do that. So the urge to the next generation is be strong and courageous, be high performance, behave high performance, and believe in things like that, and practice things that will actually take you there. Now, the final part of SCR ad is that we must give the next generation a cause and a mission. One of the biggest problems, Stephanie, that happens to people is they get lost. And when they have no vision, they get lost. The
Mm-hmm.
generation that went into the desert could not see the promised land in their mind. They could not envision it. So they wandered the desert for 40 years. The worst thing a generation can have is no vision. So this is the duty of the older generation to ensure that there is an intergenerational vision, not campaign promises up to 5 years, an intergenerational vision that stretches beyond themselves and stretches beyond the next generation. Why the children of Israel fell apart when they finally got into the promised land is because they didn't know what to do after they built the temple. That is the problem. So even Moses warned them and said, when you get there, you're gonna start disobeying God. And one of the reasons is they didn't know what to do afterwards. Abraham was given the original vision, which said, I will bless you until the rest of the world is blessed. So they didn't just have the mission to establish themselves in the promised land. They had the mission to expand God's network as far as every corner of the world to restore order. That was what was supposed to happen. But they lost sight of that. So once people attained the vision, they stopped being an intergenerational vision. What you must keep handing over is an intergenerational vision to each generation. When you run out of one, you need to start broadcasting another 50 years later and saying, what do we need to continue doing for the next 50 years? Then and only then, when you've handed over culture and causes, do you then hand over a set of resources. Moses handed over the military resources to Joshua. He handed over the guard of the people, handed over the gold that they had, they attained. After that, Solomon was handed over all the gold that was in the kingdom to build the temple and told how to use it. So resources along with instructions are to be handed over to the next generation. This is the reserve we're going to leave you as the next generation. This is the GDP we plan to leave to you as the next generation. This is the corporations we plan to leave to you. Not for you to ball and enjoy, but to build on. Okay? Not only to benefit from, but to build on. That is what we need to start doing. And then finally, the last thing that we need to look at is creating a network of connections and networks and systems. That is what helps them execute this. What Solomon told David that I will leave to you the God of all these priests, all these people, all these officials to then help you, support you build this temple. So what you need to start doing is working in collaboration and connection, while Moses told them to work together to achieve this. And that was the second last. That was the 5 parts of a good transfer that leads to this. Now, what must the previous generation, the one I seem to be entering into, and the from the one I'm leaving behind, what are the principles that they must uphold in order to make sure that we execute a good transfer to the youth? The first thing we must do is we must pray over them. Succession may be something we can plan and prepare for, but it is in God's hands. God will still decide. Moses prayed, and God told him, Moses prayed, and God told him Joshua is the one to succeed you. David wanted to build that temple, but God instructed him, Solomon is the one to build this temple. Your son will be the one to build my temple. At the end of the day, we can prepare the next generation, but we must make sure that as we prepare them, we must make sure that we pray for them as well, that they are prepared, and God will help us guide us to the right ones. The second one is to prepare. We must prepare them. In as much as we can pray, we have to actively prepare them. Joshua was working alongside Moses. Okay, Moses exposed him to things. He was Moses' apprentice for a long period of time, while Solomon actually walked alongside his father, who actually built up all the infrastructure and the plans. He saw his father drawing the temple, preparing it. These are things we must do. We must prepare them, but not just prepare them in terms of our apprentice, but we must prepare them also to see, to build the character we need, the cultures that we need. So cultural transfer is a long journey. Character transfer is a long journey because these generations are not going to learn. The youth are not going to learn by just merely teaching them on a board. They're going to learn by what they see. They're going to be inspired because culture and character are inspired things. Okay, so what are they seeing that's stirring up their soul to do that? Inspiration. What are they seeing to do that? The next generation, the next thing we have to do is mentor them. When we mentor them, we expose them to things. When they work in our businesses at the high level as assistants to managers and CEOs, we expose them to the meetings we go to. We expose them to the networks we have. We show them the habits that we exhibit. When we start mentoring them, we guide them, but we also expose them. That is what happened to Joshua. Joshua used to sit outside the camp as the Lord would meet face to face with Moses. Joshua would go up the mountain to get the commandments with Moses. While at the same time, Solomon was exposed to the inner dealings of his father. In fact, Solomon, when he writes the book of Proverbs, often gets guiding notes that he got from his father who spoke to him. Okay, so you can see that David actively mentored him as a king. And the second last thing we'll look at is also handing over. One of the problems that we have with each generation, sorry, Stephanie, is the is each generation wants to be the hero. Okay, I want to be the one to take us to the promised land, not my youngsters. I want to build everything. Not We don't think about where do I stop? Where's my cutoff point? And then giving it. One thing I've seen with Moses and Moses and David, is they both understood they had a cutoff point. And they spoke and said, God has not allowed me to go further than this. David was not allowed to proceed further than the temple, but to build the temple. Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land, and they accepted it. The older generation must accept their cutoff point and hand over to the next generation an unfinished mission, so that that generation doesn't have to look for a mission in their soul at risk of being veered off into the lost land, but have something to continue, because that will give them the fight. So that is how intergenerational transfer is done best, when the older generation accept there is a point where they must stop and they must hand over to the next generation. And in order to do that, they must practice delegation. At a time where they are building up, they need to start slowly delegating activities. Moses would slowly delegate activities. Solomon was getting raised in a way that he was slowly getting a few responsibilities before he ascended to becoming king. So these are the 5 principles that the older generation must practice. The younger generation must receive a culture, and they must build on that. They must receive character. They must receive a cause. They must receive resources that they can start to try and work with. Not as much, but it's more important, at least to get something to start with. They must receive connections to interact with and work with. The older generation must pray for the younger generation to get guidance, to see which leaders they must be able to pick from. Prepare those leaders, mentor those leaders, create handover points where they can hand to those leaders, and delegate responsibility slowly to ease those leaders into the leadership roles that they should be getting today. And that, I think, is the conversation we should be having as we look at Youth Day and what to do with the youth and what the youth should be doing to themselves in order for us to see a Zambia 2064, 2100. Because, Stephanie, it's us, it's this generation, that's responsible for what the next 2 generations are going to see. And if we choose to only see what's in front of us, we're going to squander a huge opportunity to develop way beyond that and to give them the country we believe. That is the biblical principles of passing the torch based on those 2 chapters.
That has been a very good presentation. I love, because I think anything in life that involves prayer, you are really bound for success. Also, you did talk about preparation, which really is the goal. I guess every good thing starts with adequate preparation as well. And obviously, handing over and delegating. I think handing over should also click a bell into the elderly people that we have today, as they do their things, as they do their business, as they invest in the youths today. I guess one of the things they might want to look at is to hand over and begin to train them now. Just like the Bible puts it, you train a child, and when they grow up, they definitely do not depart from it. Like you said, it's never too late. You can even start today.
Yeah.
I think that has really been a very good conversation, Munyumba. If you don't have anything to add on, we could actually end just like that.
And that is exactly where we'll end. I wish the youth, I wish the youth a wonderful Youth Day. God bless to all of us. I think there was a comedian who went and said, if you're 35, Youth Day is for 35 and below. If
Yeah,
you're 35 and above, then wait for Heroes Day. So we'll start to celebrate on Heroes Day. And Heroes Day is for
yeah,
those who
yeah.
vote as well. But yes, I wish you a blessed day. And also let us shift the mindset. That is what I wanted to talk about today in terms of shifting the mindset, not from the current state, but to focus on the direction. And that's where I'll end from there. Thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you very much. This has been God's Economy. Until next week, it's bye for now.